When two guards tried to escort a black Marine from his own son's graduation, no one imagined 6 Navy SEALs would rise silently from the crowd, halting the room without a single word. Solomon Drayton hadn't expected recognition when he pulled into the parking lot of Elmridge High. The building looked like countless small-town Texas schools, weathered red brick with flags fluttering above the entrance and kids hanging near the gym doors. The lot was crowded, families everywhere, parents in button-ups, siblings carrying homemade signs, grandparents leaning on walkers. He parked his Dodge Charger near the chain-link fence, stepping out in a deep blue Marine dress uniform, boots, polished bright enough to reflect the sun. Not for show, but because halfway wasn't in him. Upright posture set him apart, his calm expression carrying the stillness of a man who had lived through too many angles of life. He had driven 8 hours from Temple to make this day. Flying would have been easier, but the Charger was his wife's favorite, and since her passing 2 years earlier, the car kept her close. Before heading in, Solomon opened the glove compartment and pulled a worn photo, his wife holding baby Tyron, a small tear in the corner. He slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I promised you," he whispered. The walk to the entrance was steady, each step heavy with pride and ache. Inside, the gym was packed. Metal chairs filled the floor, bleachers overflowed, the air smelled of popcorn and floor wax, voices colliding in noisy chaos. He handed a volunteer his printed ticket, was directed to the 3rd row left side, family section. "Appreciate it," he said, voice steady. He sat in a wobbly plastic chair, adjusting without complaint, his eyes fixed on the stage with silver banners declaring Class of 2024. He spotted the line of graduates. Tyron stood tall, lanky, his mother's eyes staring from 18 years gone in. An instant. Solomon remembered holding him as a newborn, dirt still on his nails from overseas deployment. Now here they were. The crowd kept filling, programs rustling, coffee spilling, laughter echoing, but Solomon's world narrowed. Only the stage, the young faces, and the weight of that photo against his chest. Music began. Pomp and circumstance. The crowd rose. Solomon stood, shoulders square. The anthem followed, hands over hearts. Solomon didn't move. His very presence was salute enough. He thought of his wife, how she would have cried through the whole ceremony, fixed Tyron's tie 3 times before letting him leave. As the final note faded, 2 uniformed men began down the aisle, heading straight for him. They weren't police. Their black polos read Harlan Security Services, radios clipped to their belts. One was broad, bald, tight-jawed, the other taller, lanky, chewing gum. Both barely 30. Solomon noticed but didn't flinch. Stillness often spoke louder than motion. The shorter one leaned close. "Excuse me, sir. We'll need you to come with us." Solomon turned. "Is there a problem?" The taller one spoke. "This section's for families of graduating seniors." Solomon blinked, retrieved the same ticket from his pocket. "This is my seat. 3rd row left, family seating." The guard didn't look. "We got told it's full." Solomon didn't budge. "It was full when I sat down, too. Who gave that order?" The taller guard shifted, unprepared for Solomon's calm. "Look, not a big deal, seats in the back, let's not make this something." Solomon's eyes narrowed, not angry, just calculating. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk that stage. I'll be right here." Nearby heads turned, whispers stirred, a phone tilted to record. The short guard straightened, repeating his demand. "Sir, I'll ask one more time." Solomon's voice lowered, firm. "Ask all day. I'm not moving." The taller one sucked his teeth. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all." Solomon looked at him fully now. Those words weren't about logistics. They carried something older, quieter. The shadow of what he'd carried all his life. A hush began around them. people sensing a line had been crossed. The short guard muttered into his radio, never breaking eye contact. Solomon stayed seated. A pale woman beside him whispered, "Don't you let them move you." He nodded, silent. He wanted no scene, only to see his son graduate. But the guards weren't finished. "Take it up with the office," the tall one said. Solomon asked, "You have a name, son?" The guard blinked. "Officer Malley." "Not officer," Solomon corrected. "Private security," the other cut in. "Enough. If you don't stand—" He stopped when the gym door opened and 6 men walked in. No uniforms, no badges, just steady postures, squared shoulders, faces marked by harder trials. They didn't enter together, but placed themselves across the gym like scattered pieces of one unit. Anyone looking close would see. They moved the same, watched the same, sat the same. Solomon didn't need to look. He knew them. The guards didn't, not yet. The air shifted. Students' names were called. Applause tried to resume, but attention hung on the 3rd row. Malley leaned closer, his voice low. "I'm doing you a favor. Doesn't need to get ugly." Solomon's eyes flicked to him. "You don't have that kind of favor to give." The taller one faltered, but the short one, Garvin, bristled, hand hovering over his radio. A man stood from the bleachers, silent, arms crossed, eyes locked. Another man stood opposite, then a third. No one needed to speak. Solomon knew every face. These were men he'd led through mud, gunfire, silence, darker than memory. Garvin leaned down. "You're making this into a situation." Solomon replied calmly, "You're not listening." Before Garvin could speak, a voice cut from 10 feet away. "Is there a reason this man's being bothered?" Calm, steady, the kind of voice that quieted rooms. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard stood in the aisle. Black coat over gray shirt. Creed Marston, the one Solomon had dragged from wreckage in Kandahar, bullets raining as he pulled him across 200 yards of sand. Garvin asked who he was. Creed stepped forward. "I asked you a question." Malley raised a hand. "Sir, we've got this handled." "No," Creed interrupted. "You don't." Another man stood, then another, until 4 SEALs dotted the gym. The audience no longer pretended to ignore. The room was alive with the kind of silence that demanded respect. Solomon finally looked up at Creed and gave a nod. Recognition, nothing more. The ceremony blurred for Solomon. His memory pulled him. Backward, 15 years to Afghanistan. Late afternoon in Kandahar, the sun crashed down. Sand turned rust red. He'd just finished briefing when a roadside bomb tore the convoy apart, Humvees flipping like toys. Gunfire poured, not scattered, but coordinated. Smoke filled the valley. 6 men were down, trapped behind burning wreckage. Among them, Creed, bleeding from his thigh. Without hesitation, Solomon bolted, crossing open ground under fire, dragging men out by their vests, hauling another from beneath an engine block while metal seared his hands. He moved them all, Creed gasping but pushing through pain, others covering as best they could. When the firing ended, silence remained, but 6 were alive. After that, they never questioned where Solomon stood. If he asked, they would be there. Always. Back in the gym, the air seemed thicker. Creed stayed standing, arms at his side, gaze locked on the 2 guards. The rest of the SEALs remained scattered, but each one had subtly shifted, legs planted, eyes sharp, like chess pieces sliding into place without a sound. Parents in the crowd glanced nervously, phones half raised, unsure if they were about to film history or a confrontation that would end badly. Malley's gum slowed. He looked around, suddenly realizing this wasn't the scene he thought he was managing. "Look," he said quickly, voice a little higher. "We just need him to move. We've got instructions." Creed's head tilted. "From who?" "Garvin's." jaw tensed. Principal's office. His words didn't carry the certainty he wanted. The tall SEAL in the back row, Barrett, spoke without raising his voice. "You sure about that?" That single question tightened the silence. Solomon stayed calm, shoulders square. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice once. That stillness weighed heavier than anger ever could. Tyron, waiting on the stage steps, had noticed the exchange. His eyes darted from his father to the guards, then to the men standing across the gym. He didn't fully understand, but instinct told him something profound was happening. Garvin took a half-step forward, clearly frustrated by the loss of control. "Sir," he barked at Solomon, "if you don't move, we'll have to escort you. Out." Creed stepped closer. "You won't." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut like steel through the gym's echo. Mally swallowed hard. The crowd was no longer neutral. A ripple of support murmured, people whispering, nodding toward Solomon. Parents knew what they were seeing. They had watched their kids run the field, scrape knees, graduate. And here was a man who had given decades to a country, simply trying to watch his son cross the stage. The principal, Dr. Rollins, finally appeared at the side of the stage, nervous energy in his step. He adjusted his glasses, spoke into a mic that squealed before settling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that everyone please remain seated while we continue our ceremony." He looked toward the security guards, trying to signal them down. Garvin ignored it. Rollins cleared his throat. "Mr. Drayton is welcome to his seat. Let's move forward." That should have been the end, but Garvin lingered, unwilling to let go of control. Creed caught his stare. "You heard the man," he said, quietly. "Sit down or step back." For the first time, Garvin realized he wasn't facing a single Marine. He was facing 6 shadows from a past he couldn't imagine. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back. Mally followed. No apology, just retreat. The tension loosened, though, not completely. The SEALs eased back into their spots, but their presence remained sharp, a reminder. Solomon didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply nodded once toward Creed, then fixed his eyes on the stage where his son's class began to cross. Names echoed, applause rose, cameras flashed. Tyron's turn came, his name clear through the speaker. Solomon stood, not caring that he was the only one on his feet. His hands clapped hard, echoing like artillery across the gym. Tyron walked across, diploma in hand, chin high, eyes locked, on his father. That look, recognition, pride, understanding, was worth every mile of the drive, every battle behind them, every confrontation faced. For a moment, time bent. It was just father and son, a circle unbroken. After the ceremony, families spilled into the parking lot, balloons bouncing, voices lifting. Solomon walked steady, his son by his side, diploma still clutched tight. The SEALs drifted near, never intrusive, just shadows close enough to be felt. Creed finally stepped forward, clasping Solomon's hand in a grip that carried history. "You saved my life," he said simply. Solomon shook his head. "We saved each other." Tyron watched silently, realizing his father's world was bigger, heavier than he'd ever known. Garvin and Mally lingered near their van, avoiding eyes. Whatever fire they had earlier was gone. The crowd had seen it all. No one would forget. Tyron leaned close. "Dad, who are they?" Solomon smiled faintly. "Men who know what it means to stand. That's all you need to know right now." His son nodded, holding tighter to his diploma. The photo in Solomon's pocket warmed against his chest, as though his wife herself had been there, watching. But the night didn't end quietly. Local news had picked up murmurs before the ceremony was even finished. By evening, clips of the standoff appeared online. Grainy phone footage of guards confronting a Marine, of silent men rising from the crowd. Narratives spread fast. Some claimed Solomon was being profiled. Others insisted it was a misunderstanding. But none could deny what the footage showed. 6 men, wordless, standing like a wall behind one of their own. Reporters knocked on Solomon's door the next day. He didn't answer. Calls came from networks, from advocacy groups, even from the base. Solomon ignored them. He hadn't gone for a fight, hadn't wanted attention. He only wanted his son's day. Tyron, though, had questions. "Dad, why didn't—" "You tell me?" Solomon paused, considering. "Because it was never about me. It was about you, walking across that stage." But Tyron pressed. "No, I mean about them. About what you did." So Solomon told him. Pieces at first, then more. About Kandahar, about the convoy, about Creed bleeding in the sand, about carrying men through smoke and fire when any step could have been his last. He didn't glorify it. He spoke in the same tone he used for everything, steady, grounded, clear. Tyron listened, wide-eyed, holding on to every word. For the first time, he saw his father not just as the man who raised him, but as the man who had carried others through hell. The story spread further than Solomon wanted. Veterans who recognized the names reached out. Old photos surfaced. Grainy shots of men in desert gear, young faces hardened by combat. Each time Solomon saw them, he thought of the ones who hadn't made it home, ghosts that followed him even into joy. Yet he also thought of that gym, of Creed's voice cutting through, of the SEALs standing without hesitation. That bond, forged in blood and fire, had never broken, and now his son had seen it too. Weeks passed. Tyron prepared for college, letters from universities piling on the table. Solomon polished his boots one morning, watching the boy pack. Tyron turned. "Dad," when they stood up, it felt like they were standing for me, too. Solomon's throat tightened. He only nodded, unable to answer. Some truths were too heavy for words. One evening, Solomon drove alone back to the school parking lot. The bleachers were empty now, banners gone, the gym silent. He sat in his Charger, photo in hand. "He did it," he whispered to his wife's image. Our boy walked tall. His eyes closed, the silence wrapping around him like a memory. In his mind, he could still hear boots in sand, rifles cracking, Creed's ragged breath as he dragged him across dirt. But he could also hear his son's laughter, see his stride across the stage, one past, one future, both carried inside him. Summer. In Elmridge carried the weight of heat thick enough to slow even the most restless hearts. Tyron spent afternoons with friends, but at night he often found himself in the garage where his father polished tools or sat with the Charger door open, old jazz drifting from the speakers. Solomon never said much unless asked, but Tyron had begun to notice that silence wasn't emptiness. It was history, carefully guarded, waiting for the right questions. One night, curiosity pressed too hard. Tyron leaned against the car and asked, "Dad, did you ever think you wouldn't come home?" Solomon looked at him, rag in hand, then returned his gaze to the hood. "Every man who goes out thinks about that. The trick is not letting it stop you," Tyron pressed. "But weren't you scared?" Solomon's hand paused. "Fear's not weakness. It's proof you know what's at stake. Courage is moving anyway." His voice was quiet, but each word carried iron. These conversations became their rhythm. Solomon revealing fragments, Tyron piecing them together. The boy who once only knew. His father, as steady and distant, now saw the depth beneath. And for Solomon, sharing wasn't easy. Every story pulled threads of memory that never quite healed. But he saw the way Tyron listened. Not with pity, but with respect. And it gave him a reason to speak. Meanwhile, the video of the graduation confrontation didn't fade. It had crossed state lines, then borders. Online forums debated it, veterans. Groups praised it, talk shows dissected it. The man who refused to move became a headline. Solomon disliked it. He hadn't refused for drama. He had refused because his son deserved a father in the front row. Still, the attention grew. Invitations to speak arrived, offers of interviews, even a publisher reaching out. He turned them all down. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. He only wanted to be a father. But one invitation came differently. A letter, handwritten, from the mayor's office. Not political spin, not media flair. Just a request. Attend the city's annual memorial service for veterans. Solomon considered, ignoring it, but something in the tone, humble, respectful, made him pause. He finally agreed, not for himself, but for the names etched on the marble downtown. Men he once knew. The day of the service, he wore his uniform again, boots gleaming. Tyron came with him, nervous but proud. The square was filled with rows of chairs, flags lining the streets, a podium set before the memorial wall. Families gathered, some clutching flowers, others holding framed photos of those they'd lost. Solomon walked quietly, greeting no one, simply finding his place near the center. Tyron stood tall beside him. When the speeches began, Solomon drifted into thought. Words of sacrifice, of duty, of freedom washed over him. He had heard them all. Before, had lived the truth beneath them. But when the mayor called his name unexpectedly, asking him to stand, Solomon froze. The crowd turned, clapping. He rose slowly, his posture straight as steel. He hadn't wanted recognition. Still, as he looked at the wall, names carved deep, he realized it wasn't about him. It was about those men, about Creed, about every soldier who hadn't returned. He nodded once, then sat, the applause echoing like a distant battlefield. That night, Tyron asked why he disliked attention so much. Solomon answered carefully, "Because real service doesn't need an audience. The men who deserve the most recognition can't stand to hear it. They're gone." Tyron absorbed it quietly. His understanding of his father deepened again, layer by layer. Yet the graduation day kept circling in people's minds. Local newspapers dug further into Harlan security services, questioning their actions. Parents who'd been at the gym wrote letters recounting how Solomon was singled out. Pressure mounted. Within weeks, Harlan terminated both Garvin and Malley. The official statement cited unprofessional conduct. To Solomon, it meant nothing. Justice wasn't job loss. Justice was never needing to prove he belonged in the first place. Still, Tyron noticed the shift. People saw, Dad. They know. Solomon only shook his head. Truth doesn't always change minds, but it plants seeds. Life moved on. Tyron worked a summer job at a hardware store preparing for college. Solomon adjusted to quieter days. But reminders lingered. Letters from strangers, veterans knocking on his door to shake his hand, a growing awareness in town that he had become something larger than himself. He resisted it, but couldn't deny it existed. One evening, Creed visited. He arrived without calling, as he often did. Tyron answered the door, eyes widening at the towering figure. Creed smiled faintly. "Evening. Your father home." They sat in the garage, two men bound by memory stronger than time. Creed spoke first. "You know, that day in Kandahar, I never told you. When you dragged me out, I thought you wouldn't make it. I thought none of us would. But you did. You carried us all." Solomon looked away, jaw tight. "And still lost others." Creed nodded. "That's the weight we carry, but you gave us a chance to be here today." Tyron listened from the doorway, hearing more than he was supposed to. He saw how Creed's respect wasn't forced, wasn't polite. It was carved from truth. When Creed left, Tyron asked quietly, "Dad, Do you ever regret it? The Marines. Solomon sat silent for a long time. Finally, he said, I regret the losses. I regret the pain. But I don't regret standing when it mattered. As summer waned, the day came to move Tyron into his dorm. Boxes filled the charger, his diploma tucked safely on top. The drive was quiet, both of them aware of the shift. At the campus, crowds of students and parents buzzed, laughter and nerves blending. They carried boxes together, arranging the small dorm room, posters on walls, books stacked, clothes folded. When it was time to leave, Solomon lingered, scanning every detail. Ty ran, hugged him tight. I'll make you proud, Dad. Solomon's voice cracked just slightly. You already have. Driving back alone, the charger felt heavier than ever. But when he reached home, the garage light flicked on. He sat in silence, staring at the photo again. His wife had always believed in Tyron's strength, had pushed him to dream beyond their small town. Solomon whispered to her picture. He's ready. Weeks turned into months. Tyron thrived at school, sending updates, visiting on weekends. Solomon adjusted to the quiet, though loneliness lingered. Yet whenever he felt it pressing too hard, a knock would come. Creed, Barrett, one of the others, checking in. The brotherhood never faded. Sometimes they sat in silence, beer bottles sweating on the workbench, no words needed. Other times, they swapped memories, laughter rough but real, the kind only survivors could share. Then came Veterans Day. The high school invited Solomon back for an assembly. He almost refused, but Tyron called from campus and urged him. Dad, you should go. Kids should see someone real, not just in a textbook. So he went, uniform pressed, shoes gleaming. The gym was full of students, banners hanging. When he walked in, the applause startled him. He hadn't expected recognition. He only expected to sit in the back and listen. But the principal called him forward. Standing at the microphone, Solomon hesitated. Words were never his weapon. But then he looked at the rows of students, young faces alive with curiosity, and thought of Tyron at that age. He began simply. I'm not here to give a speech. I'm here to remind you that respect doesn't come from a uniform. It comes from how you carry yourself, from what you choose to stand for. And when the time comes, you'll all be asked to stand for something. Don't sit down when it matters. The gym erupted in applause. He stepped back, heart steady, not proud of himself, but of the lesson carried forward. He glanced at the back row. Creed was there, arms crossed, watching with the same quiet faith as always. And for the first time in years, Solomon allowed himself the faintest smile. Winter settled over Elm Ridge with a quiet kind of weight. The trees stood bare, wind scraping against the old gym windows where months earlier everything had unfolded. Solomon's life returned to routine. Early mornings, long drives to the store, evenings polishing boots or listening to the faint hum of jazz. Yet beneath the ordinary beat of days, something had shifted. He carried not only his own past, but the way strangers now looked at him, the way whispers followed his name in town. Tyran came home for the holidays, taller somehow, more assured. College had carved edges of independence in him, but his respect for his father deepened with each visit. One night, as they decorated the tree, Tyran asked, Dad, do you think you'll ever tell the full story? To everyone, not just me? Solomon paused, hanging a faded ornament that once belonged to his wife. Some stories don't belong on stages. They belong in the hearts of those who lived them. Tyron didn't push, but he understood. The bond between father and son grew tighter, even in silence. They spent hours fishing at the lake or driving country roads with the Charger's windows down. Tyron often asked questions, not just about, War, but about life, choices, regrets. Solomon answered honestly, sometimes with long pauses, other times with a single sentence. Each answer stitched another thread of connection, but attention hadn't faded completely. Early in the new year, a veterans group invited Solomon to Washington, D.C. to attend a ceremony honoring unsung heroes. They had seen the graduation, video, tracked his history, spoken to men like Creed. At first, Solomon resisted. He didn't want medals or speeches, yet Creed persuaded him. It's not about you. It's about the men whose names never got carved. You carry them every day. Let others carry a piece too. Reluctantly, Solomon agreed. In D.C., marble monuments stretched against the sky, cold air biting his face. The ceremony gathered veterans from across the country, men and women of all ages. When Solomon's name was called, he stepped onto the stage slowly, hands steady. A general handed him a plaque, words about courage and sacrifice filling the air. Solomon accepted silently, then looked out across the crowd. In the faces he saw not strangers, but echoes of men he had known, those who had laughed beside him in desert tents, who had fallen beside him in smoke. He bowed his head, whispering their names under his breath. The applause thundered, but he heard only the quiet voices of memory. Returning home, he placed the plaque in a drawer, out of sight. Tyron found it later, asked why he didn't display it. Solomon answered simply, "I don't need a wall to remember." Yet Tyron saw something else in his father's eyes, acceptance. Maybe recognition didn't change the past, but it honored it in some way. Spring came, and with it, Tyron's second year of school. Solomon visited the campus often, sitting quietly at basketball games or slipping into the back of lectures. He didn't intrude, but his presence reminded Tyron of roots, of steady ground. Professors noticed, classmates asked, and Tyron proudly said, "That's my dad." Word spread, and students who had seen the viral video connected the dots. Some asked Solomon questions, others simply shook his hand. He answered few, but his calm presence carried lessons stronger than any speech. Meanwhile, the SEALs kept close. They visited often, sharing meals, sometimes bringing their families. The bond extended beyond battlefield memories into everyday life. Birthdays, graduations, even small barbecues in the backyard became gatherings where stories flowed, laughter, mixing with old scars. Tyron grew up surrounded by men who carried both the weight of war and the resilience of survival. Each visit taught him something unspoken. That strength wasn't about noise, but about standing when it counted. One summer evening, Creed pulled Solomon aside. "You know, you've become a story, whether you like it or not. Kids look up to we. You. Veterans look to you. What you did in that gym, it mattered." Solomon shook his head. "I only wanted to see my boy walk." Creed smiled faintly. "And that's why it mattered. You showed the world that standing for family is as noble as standing on any battlefield." Solomon didn't reply, but the words lingered. Time moved forward, relentless. Tyron graduated from college, cap tilted, smile wide. Solomon sat in the front row again, this time with no interruptions, no guards questioning his place. The SEALs came too, scattered through the audience like silent guardians. When Tyron crossed the stage, his father stood tall, clapping with the same thunder as before. History repeated, but this time, peace hung in the air. Afterward, at a small family gathering, Tyron raised his glass. "To my father," he said, voice steady, "who taught me that strength isn't about battles, but about presence, about being there, no matter what." The room erupted in cheers, but Solomon only bowed his head, emotion tightening his chest. He never sought praise, but hearing it from his son was enough to ease years of silence. As the years rolled on, the story of that graduation remained etched in community memory. People still whispered about the Marine who refused to move, about the SEALs who rose without a word. It became legend in town lore, retold at school assemblies, shared among neighbors. But to Solomon, it was never legend. It was simply a moment, a father keeping a promise, a unit keeping their bond. Nothing more, nothing less. In quieter years, when Tyron had children of his own, they came to visit often. Solomon, older now, sat with grandkids on his knee, telling gentler stories, fishing trips, small-town mischief, how their father once spilled juice all over his homework. But sometimes, when the night grew still and the kids were asleep, Tyron would sit beside him and ask about Kandahar, about Creed, about the men who stood in that gym. Solomon answered carefully, still sparing some truths, but passing on enough for Tyron to carry forward. One evening, as the sun set over Elmridge, Tyron asked the question that had waited years. "Dad, what kept you going when everything was falling apart?" Solomon looked out at the horizon, long shadows stretching across the yard. "Promises," he said quietly. "To your mother, to my men, to you. Promises keep a man standing when nothing else will." That was the lesson Tyron carried into his own life, teaching it to his children, weaving it into every choice he made. And though the world often forgot, in their family the memory remained sharp, that once, in a crowded gym, a father refused to be moved, and 6 men rose like unspoken thunder to remind everyone what loyalty truly meant. Years later, long after Solomon had passed, the town erected a small plaque at the school gym entrance. It didn't list battles or medals. It simply read, "He stood when it mattered." Students passed it daily, some pausing, some hurrying by. But for Tyron and his children, it was more than words. It was the legacy of a man who taught them that silence could be stronger than shouts, that presence could be louder than speeches, and that love could outlast even war. And so the story lived, not in headlines or viral videos, but in the steady rhythm of family, in the bonds of brotherhood, and in the quiet truth that the greatest victories are often unseen.